prayers. I don't know. They were thinking about moving her to a step-down room the day before. I don't know if that happened or not. So he didn't say. So I don't know. And then Debbie Woodard's. Anybody heard from Debbie in the last couple of days or so by chance?
I was there yesterday. She's doing pretty good. She still has some symptoms from where she fell. So I don't think the doctors released her completely from her surgery either. So her blood pressure is still low, and she has to get up, slowly and carefully.
Jamie says she saw her yesterday. She's doing pretty good, still having symptoms from her fall, the concussion, and that her blood pressure is still somewhat low, and she's not been released from her surgery yet. Did I get it? Yeah. So keep Debbie in your prayers as well. All right, October the 9th is movie night. I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but we changed it from October the 2nd, or I changed it from October 2nd to October the 9th. That's a Sunday night, and we'll be watching a couple of movies about Noah. Each are about 20 minutes long, and in between we'll have intermission with snacks. We'll probably just ask you to bring some pickup snacks and so forth for in between for intermission. So they're pretty interesting movies, I think, somewhat comical, somewhat entertaining, and not necessarily totally biblical, but still much of it is biblical and just gives you kind of a sense of the times then and the times now. So, all right. I'm sorry. 6. We'll start at 6 that evening. So it won't be a late night. So 20 minutes each, maybe 20 minutes in between, and be out in an hour or so. Okay? All right. Anything else this morning I need to announce? Oh, Novella's son is home, so had a good mission trip and made it home safely. So that's an answer to prayer. Yeah, fantastic. Great. Thank you for his service. All right, anything else? Thank you. Jeff, would you mind praying and opening us in prayer this morning, please?
Heavenly Father, we first come before you and just thank you for the healings that are taking place. We ask your direction, your support, and that is the breakfast. Lord, we give this day to you and ask for your leadership, your time, Pastor, that we receive the word and are strengthened by it. Lord, we just pray now that as we dive into your word, we find not only knowledge, but application. And we leave this place stronger and more dedicated to you. For it's in Christ's name we pray.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. All right, we're going to finish Genesis chapter 4 this morning and dig into chapter 5. I'm not promising we'll finish chapter 5, but we'll get well into it anyway. All right, so with that, Martha, if you would read Genesis chapter 4, verses 25 and 26, please.
Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. The men began to call upon the name of the Lord.
Okay, so these two verses are similar somewhat to Genesis chapter 1, where you get an overview or summary of what we're going to get in detail in Genesis chapter 5. In Genesis chapter 1, we got an overview of creation as such, and then in chapter 2, there was a focus on Adam and Eve. And so we'll kind of follow that same format here. We get a brief summary overview of the line of Seth. Then in chapter 5, we'll get into detail with a focus on the line of Seth. So I know we talked about this maybe last week. Sometimes you think my illustrations are somewhat weird. This one is probably going to be one of the most weird that you have put. So you're going to have to think real hard. Now, how does this illustration fit into the lesson today. So the illustration that we're going to see here in just a second is the 1998 movie, The Water Boy, starring Adam Sandler. Bobby Boucher was his character's name. Bobby is 31 years old. He lives at home with his mother. He just got fired from his job, so he ends up being the water boy for this down-and-out college football team called the South Central Louisiana State University Mud Dogs. So during an incident in training or practice, Bobby demonstrates himself to be a ferocious tackler, and he is then substituted onto the team's defensive squad. So thanks to him, the Mud Dogs' fortune turns and they become a powerful football team. So if you would play that little clip of the movie The Water Boy, please. Well, was there no sound with it? No? Huh, strange. What? There should be. Should be, yeah. Give it to us one more time since it was that quick, so. That's Bobby Boucher, Adam Sandler. This is some unsuspecting person. And there he is tackling him, and the team can't believe it. So sorry there's no sound with that. So anyway, as I mentioned, Bobby Boucher is substituted onto the team and becomes a star player. All right, so can anybody guess how this is going to be an illustration of Genesis 4, 25, and 26? Everybody's shaking their head. No. Seth? What about Seth?
He comes into the scene and becomes the star.
Seth comes on the scene, becomes the star, becomes the focus. Exactly right, Jill. And he also substitutes for who? Abel. So here we had Bobby Boucher substituting onto the team, and now we're going to focus on Seth, who substitutes for Abel. So the line of Seth becomes the focus of the genealogy as we go forward in the Bible. It becomes, just as Jill said, the star of the Bible, in that who ultimately comes from the line of Seth? Jesus. So this is the important line. Okay, you okay, Alan? I'm looking back there at Alan. Our grandchild hadn't created havoc in there, has he, Alan? No? Okay, I'm good. A little bit concerning when Alan shows up when he's here. So. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, the name Seth means, anybody see that in your notes or wherever? He's appointed or appointing. So we see from Seth's name that he is appointed to substitute for Abel. So Seth and his unnamed wife, whom they have a child, whom they name Enosh. And the name Enosh means man or humanity. Okay? So with the line of Cain, we learn about their human accomplishments. So the line of Cain, his descendants were accomplished in a lot of different areas. The pastor touched on that last week: culture, art, music, metalworking, building. So a lot of developments occurred from the line of Cain. So what do we learn about the line of Seth from these verses in Genesis 4, 25, and 26? There's a typo there in your handout, by the way. It should be Seth instead of Cain. What do we learn about Seth in the verses in Genesis 4, 25, and 26? Yeah, people began to call upon the name of the Lord, Jeff says. So this implies that the line of Seth engaged in public worship of God. So we see this line of Seth beginning to distinguish itself from the lineage of Cain. So we see another first in the Bible in some translations of Genesis chapter 4, 26. Anybody know what this first is? Prayer. I didn't get that one, but yeah, prayer. What else? Good. Anything? They name a grandchild. Yeah. This is the first use in these verses of the word Yahweh for Lord or God here. So Yahweh does not make clear the naming, the meaning of his name, though until the incident of the burning bush and with Moses in Exodus chapter 3. In Exodus chapter 6, then God tells Moses who he is and what his plan is for related to Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay, so it's first use of the name Yahweh. So with this, you're going to now think back to last week. That's a challenge, I know. Think back to last week. What applications or what do you get out of this lesson today and last week that you can apply? You can always be substitute, yeah. No one is indispensable, right? That came from a substitute teacher, Nancy says. That's right. Well, that is good. So that, I didn't have that one, but Jill makes a good point there. That God was unable to complete his plan even though Cain killed Abel. God provided Seth to be the substitute for the line of Abel. Very good, Jill. What else? Do you remember what Cain's name means? Anybody remember what Cain's name? Look back at your notes. Yeah, flipping back. Cain's name, Cain is wanderer. Remember that? Yeah, wanderer. So I think that's a message there that we need to be diligent not to become a wanderer from God like Cain became. And then we also said, we talked about settling for something less than the best. Settling for something less than God would have for us in his provision. Just as Jill mentioned, he provided a substitute for Abel with Seth, and so we need to be careful that we don't settle for something less than God's best. So we kind of characterized Cain's line. If you remember last week, Cain's line we said was very what? C-U-L-T-U-R. Cultured, thank you. Was very cultured, and we talked about not that a lot of people want to substitute culture for God. They become worshipers of culture, or those people who are cultural rather than worshipers of God. And the point is that only Jesus can redeem us. Culture, regardless of how cultured you are, culture cannot redeem us. All right, so then we also said we used one of the things that Pastor Will says often, that we as parents and grandparents, something that we do on occasion, our children, our grandchildren will take to excess. So we got to be careful to not find ourselves doing something on occasion that our children and grandchildren then will take to excess, but assuming that's something not good for us. We use the example of playing golf on Sunday, going fishing, doing whatever. So, all right, and then the last thing we talked about is what seems important in our eyes today in perspective of eternity is not that important. We talked about who won the Oscar in 2017, and no one knew who that was, right? Now I'm trying to think who it was myself, whoever. Yeah, Affleck, yeah. Affleck won, never heard of him, but anyway, he won it in 2017. No one could remember that before I told you that last Sunday. So at that time, that was really important we talked about. That was on TV, social media, YouTube, wherever. But over time, 5 years later, we don't even know who it was in here. But that little boy we talked about in 2017 who accepted Christ as his Savior, no one knew that at the time. So that wasn't very important other than maybe to him and his family. It didn't make social media, it didn't make TV, it didn't make anything. But for eternity, that becomes much more important. So putting things in eternal perspective is, I think, a message for us out of that lesson. Okay, anything else? All right, let's look to Genesis chapter 5. And if you would put up that first image, please. All right, this is an image. You can't read it, I know that, but an image of a family tree. And this lesson, Genesis chapter 5, is all about a family tree, family trees. So many people like to trace their family tree. And you may be one of those people. Martha spends time tracing her family's genealogy. She goes down to the Wilson County Archives and goes through the books or whatever and has traced her family tree. So my second cousin gave me a book where he was also interested in family trees, and he traced the family tree of my maternal grandmother. So he developed a whole book about it. So people are interested in that. And sometimes we find in our family trees that some of our ancestors were highly renowned, right? They were important people and did some major accomplishment and so forth. Sometimes, though, we find that those people in our family tree are infamous rather than famous, right? What's that, Jim? Scoundrels, yes. They could be, what's that, Karen? Your daddy's son. Okay, well, we won't go down that line of thought, but anyway. So we'd probably be just as happy not to learn about that part of our family tree that was infamous. So sometimes family trees or folks are proud of their family trees, proud of their heritage, proud of, those limbs on the tree where those people were famous or important and so forth. But sometimes for those fallen leaves off the tree, we just soon forget about those, right? So some of those fallen leaves. So today we're going to be looking at the family tree of Seth. And so Martha, if you would read Genesis chapter 5, the first 5 verses.
Do we have a handout?
Oh, you do have a handout. I'm sorry. Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome.
What would I do without you? Oh, gosh. What would I do without you? Stan's got him. Should have just enough if I counted correctly, fortunately. Okay. All right, good. Okay, so Genesis 5, verse 1 tells us this is the book of the generations of Adam. So there's something interesting in these first 5 verses of Genesis chapter 5 about the recording of Adam's family tree. What do you find interesting in these verses?
Yeah, she ain't read them yet.
Oh, you didn't read them yet? I'm sorry. Kim, you're keeping me straight today. I appreciate it. I need some, I think. Well, I'm blaming it on having the grandchild here for several days. All right, Mark.
This is the book of the generations of
I don't know if your mic is... Oh, can you hear it? Okay.
This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and named them man in the day when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of the son in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Then the days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died.
Okay, so back to the first question. Sorry about that. So, do you find anything interesting in these verses?
Yes,
This-
you're complaining about a grandchild at your age. Well, you could have been having a child.
Jeff said I'm complaining about having a grandchild at my age when I could have been the age of Adam or somebody. So, yeah, with grandchildren. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute.
It says that, he said, on the day when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. But if you go down to verse 3, it said, when Adam lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness. It doesn't say the likeness of God, it says in his own likeness.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Look down a few questions there. Genesis mentions that man, Nancy was saying that Adam was made in the image of God. Man then, going on reading this genealogy, says was made in the likeness of man. So what's the implication of that? Sin corrupted Adam. So now are we still made in the image of God? Do we still have a likeness of God as humans? Yes, certainly. Okay. So in spite of humanity's fall, we still are made in the image of God. So God continues to have relationship with us, even though Adam fell and even though we're sinful humans, right? So, at our relationship with God, though, will only be fulfilled or completed at Jesus' coming. When we, again, unite with death with Jesus, or as believers, or if he comes before that time in the rapture. All right, anything else interesting? A good catch, Nancy. Anything else interesting in these verses?
There's no mention of Cain and Abel.
No mention of neither Cain nor Abel. Well, Abel, he may have died before he had children, but he still gets no mention, and there's no mention of Cain at all, who we know had children. So why do you think there's no mention of Cain?
He's wandering.
What's that? No, he's wandering off, Jeff says. What'd you say, no?
Just
Forgot
forgot about him, she said.
about him, yeah. Well, that's kind of true of both of those. If we have a fallen leaf on our family tree, it's gone now. If we have a fallen leaf on our family tree, do we sometimes just kind of forget about them, let them wander off? So that's our human approach to that. I think from this point forward, though, the focus is on Seth. Just clearly points out now the focus is turning to Seth and his lineage, and that's where God is going to take us through the rest of the Bible. So the phrase, this is the book of the generations, occurs only one other place in the Bible. Where is that?
Would that be after the flood?
Where?
I'm guessing, would that be after the flood?
Stan says after the flood. Doesn't say that, but in Matthew. In Matthew, who is the book of generations?
About Jesus.
Jesus. This is the book. It says this is the book of the generations of Jesus Christ. So in Genesis, there's generations of the first Adam, and in Matthew, there are generations of the last Adam. So, however, there are 11 genealogies included in Genesis, and this is the second, we're seeing in chapter 5, the second of these 11 genealogies. So the genealogy of Cain was the first one. Now we see the genealogy of Seth being the second one. So we just determined that the Genesis chapter 5 traces the family tree of Seth and not Cain. Why does the family tree, we said this earlier, Seth becomes the focus of the Bible? It's what? I'm sorry? It's the good branch, yeah. All right, what did you say, Kim? I'm sorry. This is the genealogy of Jesus. So it gets on into the Kim says the New Testament. So here we're tracing not only a physical genealogy, we begin to trace a spiritual genealogy. And I don't know, maybe some of you have done this. I just thought about this. Have you traced the spiritual genealogy in your families, any of you? Something that's different than the physical genealogy, isn't it? Because it may not be a blood relative who was the person who led you to Christ, which you might consider as part of your spiritual family, right? Or who you may have led someone to Christ, would be part of your spiritual family in your spiritual genealogy. So anyway, from this point forward, we start focusing on Seth, which is the spiritual genealogy to come, Jesus, obviously. All right, so earlier we learned that Seth means appointed. Why name him appointed? Why do you think he was named appointed?
Because his genealogy would eventually lead to Jesus.
Roger says his genealogy leads us to Jesus. I mean, that's a good answer. I think that certainly could be it. Also, he was appointed to take whose place? Abel's place. So he's appointed to take Abel's place. Cain's descendants rebelled against God. Genesis 4:4 says, "And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard." So Seth is to replace godly Abel and procreate the ancestors of Jesus. So in the first 5 verses of Genesis chapter 5, we begin to see a difference in the recording of the descendants of Seth and the recording of the descendants of Cain. What's the difference? Genesis chapter 5 has something about Seth's ancestors that's given to us that it didn't. What's that? Their ages. So the ages of Seth's descendants are provided, whereas for Cain's descendants, there are no ages provided. So why would the ages of Seth's descendants be recorded and not the ages of Cain's descendants? Nancy says that by the ages it will take us historically, numerically, up to the flood, from Adam to Noah. That's certainly true. We're going to get into that a little bit more here shortly. What else? Anything else? I don't know. Maybe because, again, God values faithful people. And God, by giving the ages of the descendants of Seth, he shows that he is valuing, or it's implied that he's valuing this lineage, this line of Seth that ultimately Jesus will come from. Possibly that's it. Maybe the Cain's descendants didn't know how to count that well, Kim says. Maybe so, don't know. But anyway,
it also offers proof, of Jesus. It's historically true. And in history, if you study history, there are dates. And it gives truth to the story. It can be proven.
So Martha said, oh, well, you heard her. She's got the microphone. So, yeah, dates are important in history, and it proves historical facts, I guess, or truth. So, okay, so Jesus, in speaking to his disciples in Matthew 10:30, says, "But even the hairs of your head are all counted." So we are valued as descendants of Seth. We're valued even to the point that the number of hairs on our head are counted. Some of us are more valued than others, right? So, but we are very valued. Malachi 3:18 says, "So you will again distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves God and one who does not serve him." So at Christ's return, it said there will be an accounting between one who serves God and one who does not serve him. So there's distinction between the righteous and the wicked. It began with Cain and Seth, and we'll see that until the time of judgment. So the specific identity of Cain's descendants, after chapter 4, we see they disappear from history. We have no more history, no more knowledge of Cain's descendants as such after chapter 4. So, although Cain's descendants were living at the same time as Seth's descendants. So, wickedness was present when Seth's descendants lived, just as it's present today as we live. So, wickedness becomes so extreme, we'll see, in the time of Seth, that God eventually destroys the world and its inhabitants, with the exception of Seth's descendant, Noah, and his family. So at some point, God will again destroy the world, but before he destroys the world the next time, just as he extracted Noah in the ark, he will extract believers who are righteous at that time by being raptured. All right, Genesis 5:1 in the New King James Version says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam." What does this is the book imply?
It's written down.
It's written down. I don't know who said it. Did you say it, Mark? Yeah, it's written down. So a book implies that it was a written record kept of the generations of Adam and Seth. And possibly Adam recorded his offspring and handed it down to Noah, who eventually handed it down to Moses, that we have this written history of these generations. So have you thought about Adam writing? I've not really, till I thought this lesson, I've not thought about Adam writing, keeping track of his genealogy, but this is what this implies, that there's a written record kept by it being a book. Okay. All right, so Genesis 5:1, as does Genesis 1:26, mentions that man was made we talked about this, in the likeness of God. Why? And we talked about that earlier. Genesis 5:2 says he blessed them. What does it mean to be blessed?
Good things.
Good things, yeah. What else?
Favored.
I'm favored. Yeah, favored. Anything else? The Hebrew word that's used for blessing here means to endue with power and success. So when you type in blessings into a search on Microsoft Edge, what you get is the definition is God's favor, just as Jill just said, God's favor and protection. The word bless or blessing comes from an old English word, blession, I think is how you might say it. Based on this old English word is the word for blood. So it may originally meant to consecrate with blood. It was later used to translate the Latin word benedicere, which means to praise or worship. You know, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, when I send out my weekly emails of the prayers in the prayer books, I close typically with the word blessings me. So I usually use that closing in most all of my emails, be it with you or with whomever who may or may not be a believer. And the one reason I do that is because I think it's a subtle way of being a witness. When you say blessings, most people think of God. And I just think it's kind of a subtle way to have people think about God when you use that word. Now, there are other, obviously, closings you can use that do the same thing, but that's the one I've kind of latched on to. So, anyway, that's with that, when I say that, again, as to Jill's point, I'm really implying God's favor on God's favor and protection on whoever's receiving the email. So it says in Genesis 5:3, Adam had lived 130 years. He fathered a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. And Nancy mentioned this earlier, something sad in this verse for mankind. What is it again, Nancy? Yeah, Nancy says it shows that he has inherited his father Adam's sin nature, because it says he's made in the likeness of man instead of the likeness of God. So kind of sad to see that has happened. All right, in Genesis 5:4, we learn something important. What do we learn?
He had other sons and daughters.
Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters. We talked about last week that the historian Josephus, in a book called Antiquities of the Jews, he says by Jewish tradition is that Adam had 33 sons and 23 daughters, and we said, well, poor Eve, right? So that's a lot of sons and daughters. So anyway, so we learn here that there were other people populating the earth that came from Adam and Eve. So in Genesis 5:5, we're again told something important. What is it? Yeah, Adam's age. He lived to be 930 years old, and he died. So there are 10 generations of Seth listed. 8 times in the verses of Genesis 5 it says, and he died. He died.
How many sons did you say they had?
Jewish tradition has it as 33 sons, but 23 daughters. But that's tradition. That's not biblical, but that's tradition. So, see what, Kim? Still scary, yeah. So here in these verses, it brings the solemn observation, maybe you might say, that the curse of Adam, and all it says, and he died, being repeated 7 times in Genesis 5. So this demonstrates the lasting consequences of Adam's sin. So death is the bad news of Adam's sin. So Martha, read that again for us, that little handout, please.
And just as it is appointed for man to die once, after that comes judgment. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. Thus all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. Thus all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died.
So it's interesting here again, just the repetitive nature, and he died. Death is now reigning over man from this point forward. So the good news, though, in these verses in Genesis chapter 5, that 17 times it says, and he lived. So Romans 6:23 promises us the wages of sin are death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. So we will all die unless we're raptured. And however, we can all live eternally if we confess with our mouths Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead. So death, we can conquer death if we take those simple steps of confessing with our mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead. So who lived the longest? Ah, wrong. I got you on that one. Who? No. You got it, Mary? Enoch. Enoch hadn't died yet. All right. Martha, read. It says in Genesis 5:24, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Read Genesis 5:21 through 24, Martha.
Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him.
All right, so does anybody know what Enoch's job was? What's that? Walking. Yeah, walking. He was a walker. He was a prophet. Yes. How you know that, Jill? It's written in a note. He was a preacher or a prophet. So Martha, read Jude verses 14 and 15.
It was also about these men that Enoch, in the seventh generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones.
Read on, 15.
To execute judgment upon all, and to convict all the ungodly of their ungodly deeds which they have done in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him.
All right, so in verse 14 there it says, Behold, the Lord comes with thousands of his saints. Can you find anything interesting about this prophecy coming from Enoch? I tell you, what's Enoch prophesying there? It says, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment on all. It's the second coming. So here Enoch is prophesying about the second coming, and Jesus has not even come the first time yet, and he's prophesying about the second coming even. So I just think that's remarkable, I guess. That's not even a word to describe it, but it's Jude verses 14 and 15. So what's remarkable, at least a couple of things remarkable about Enoch. What is it? One obvious one. What's that? What? He hasn't died, right? So he walked with God. That's remarkable. What else? He what? I'm sorry. He pleased God. So he walked with God, he pleased God, and God took him. Right? So, Enoch had a special spiritual relationship with God, obviously, because it's repeated in Genesis 5:23 and Genesis 5:24. So Enoch was a unique guy. What does it mean that God took Enoch?
I think most people look at it as that was the first rapture.
Yeah, Jeff says most people consider that being the first rapture. Hebrews 11:5 says, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. For before he was taken up, he was attested to have been pleasing to God. I think Mary just said that. And so Enoch was raptured, the first rapture. So, Martha, if you would read 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18.
For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, and with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. and so we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore comfort one another with these words.
You know, those verses say in Thessalonians, they say the dead in Christ will rise before those that are raptured, first of all. So it also says that it's a sad time for those of us who are left behind when we have friends or loved ones to die. But a verse that, I don't know, a couple of 3 years or so ago, I'm not sure, it just kind of jumped out at me. But Psalm 116, verse 15 says, precious is the sight of the Lord is the death of his godly ones. To me, that's a very comforting verse. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his godly ones. So death ushers the godly ones, believers, straight into the presence of God, straight into the presence of Jesus. Wow, here it comes. So, no. Last day or two, Noah's boat building ability might be handy, right? So again, that's just a verse when you have a loved one pass away or friend pass away that you know is a believer. That to me is a verse to just bring to mind. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the godly ones. All right, so what caused Enoch to walk with God? What caused Enoch to walk with God? What in Enoch's life resulted in him walking with God?
His spiritual ancestry.
The spiritual ancestry, Martha says. I'm certainly that had a lot to do with it. Martha, read Genesis 5:21 and 22.
Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters.
So what happened when Enoch was 65 years old? Methuselah was born. Do you think the birth of Methuselah might have changed the direction of Enoch's life? Do the birth of children in our lives change the direction of our lives? Yeah, see, not. Wow, it's hard talking over this. And I think what this verse is saying is it seems the arrival of baby Methuselah changed Enoch's life, changed his relationship with God. So even though Enoch had a full-time job, he had other sons and daughters, we're told, in addition to Methuselah, but he continues to make time for God. And I love the story of the little girl. And the little girl it was in Sunday school, and the little girl's mother was telling her the story of Enoch. And she's telling a story that Enoch walked with God. And one day he walked so far, the little girl said, that he walked so far that God said, it's too far to go back, so just come on home with me. I think that's a neat story. It's too far for Enoch to go back, so come on home with me. But again, hopefully in our lives, children change our relationships, hopefully for the best with God. That it's such a miracle, children are such a miracle, that our relationship, or a lot of people's relationship with God, becomes stronger as a result of children. All right, so the Bible indicates that Adam and Eve most likely physically walked with God in the Garden of Eden. However, the Bible only specifically says one other person walked with God other than Enoch. Who was this person? Noah, right. Genesis 6:9 says Noah walked with God. So Noah was Enoch's great-grandson. So again, Enoch in his life evidently had a significant bearing, we'll see, on Noah and others in the lineage, in the lineage of Seth and then Enoch. So what does it mean to walk with God anyway? Relationship, what, Jill?
Have a relationship.
Having a relationship,
Be in tune.
being in tune with God. That's good. What else? Somebody else. I'm sorry. All right, gonna have to have a relay here. Dependence on God. Yes, dependence on God. Thank you. Anything else? I jotted down maybe living a life consistent with God's will and experiencing fellowship with God. Jerry Bridges defines walking with God as living consistently in the awareness of God's presence and that we fellowship with Him through His Word and through prayer. So, true or false, the foundation of fellowship with God is our daily quiet time. What do you think? Foundation of our daily quiet time is a foundation of our walk with God is our daily quiet time. True or false? You have to have a daily quiet time to have a relationship. Is that what you're saying? Good point. Yeah. So you think it's true then? That's the foundation? Kim, true? Yeah. I think. Not really.
No.
Uh-huh.
I think it's very important to
Uh-huh.
do that.
Uh-huh.
But I wouldn't call it the foundation.
Okay. What would you call it?
I would call it very important.
And very important?
Call it almost essential. However, I think it also matters what we do throughout the day
Yeah.
and how we
Yeah.
center our minds on God, pray without ceasing, how we treat other people. I mean, all of that factors into. I mean, our God expects our very lives to be worshiped.
Mm-hmm. So does very well said. If Stan said that the quiet time, I'm not sure I can paraphrase it. It says it's important, but what's really important is how you go through the day and your daily walk and relationships. Did I get that kind of right, Stan? Yeah, Nancy. Nancy says, I couldn't catch the name, but somebody said that having a 5-minute daily quiet time was like having one drop of water falling on your head every minute and calling it a shower. All right, so it isn't everything, but what does a daily quiet time do? Does it do anything?
Sure.
What?
And I think it's, you can have it any time of the day, but I think one of the best times would be in the morning just to center your thoughts on God and allow Him to speak to you and you to speak to Him and, get into His Word and be fed and it's just a great way to begin the day.
Yeah. Stan says, somebody say something?
Our lives need to be well-pleasing to God. In every minute, not just in our quiet time.
Yeah. Kim says our lives need to be well-pleasing to God in every minute, not just our quiet time. Stan said that to have your quiet time at the beginning of the day is a great way to start your day. Is that kind of?
It really is.
Yeah.
And, this should be taught to our children from a very early age. And, it shouldn't be like me when the first time I ever heard the term quiet time, I was in college already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
I mean that's just almost inexcusable. So, our children need to be discipled to have a daily quiet time with the Lord. But there's so much more to walking with God than simply the quiet time.
The quiet time, Stan said that the first time he heard the word quiet time was when he was in college, which he felt cheated about. I would say maybe, though, the term quiet time is a relatively new term, too. So it may not even been Stan's young, so I'm sure it's around. He just didn't hear it. But for us older folks, when we were growing up in college, the term quiet time didn't really exist.
You were at church?
It didn't. So quiet time, I probably maybe didn't call something different, but not that specific term. I don't guess I heard quiet time until, gosh, several years after college, maybe when I first heard it. So, yeah, you heard daily Bible readings or something. It may have been called something different other than quiet time. But anyway, if you don't have a morning quiet time, Bible reading, prayer, how do you think your day will go? Better, worse, no different? Jeanette, did you say something?
I said not good.
Not as good? Yeah, so it may not be the foundation, but it's a good way to start. Maybe it's some part of the foundation, I don't know, but just as Stan has said, others have said, it's the beginning, it's to be carried through the day. It's not, as Nancy said, it's not an all-in thing, that you should still be spending time studying the Bible and more in-depth prayer time, but it's a good start. And if you don't start there, particularly with children, Stan made a good point, if you don't start there with your children, then it's probably less likely they're going to do any in-depth Bible study or in-depth prayer time if they're not even familiar with a quiet time. Maybe so. Okay, so we're going to stop here and pick up next Sunday, and there's four kind of principles, I guess you'd say, with walking with God, what walking with God involves. So we'll pick up there next Sunday, and we'll finish chapter 5, get into chapter 6 next Sunday. Okay? And again, thank y'all for being here.